Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are very lucky because we're being joined by Maddie Baker. And Maddie is an invasive species specialist with the Colorado Parks and Wildlife at the Department of Natural Resources. She's going to be going over the zebra mussels being found in the Colorado River and how CPW is working to control the spread. So I will pass it over to you.
All right. Thanks so much for having me this morning and for the interest in what I eat, sleep, and breathe, which is aquatic nuisance species. So let me just go ahead and share my screen and we'll get started. Feel free to let me know if anything's not looking right. Alrighty. So just a brief overview of our aquatic nuisance species program within Colorado Parks and Wildlife. I don't need to read this to you, but ultimately our program focuses first on the prevention of the introduction of invasive species, especially zebra and quagga, and now golden mussels, for the sake of the protection of our infrastructure, our recreational opportunities, and our economy. So we do this through three big prongs, which is WID, which stands for Watercraft Inspection and Decontamination. If you boat in Colorado, it's likely that you've been through a watercraft inspection before, and that's just to prevent any risk factors from introducing invasive species to our reservoirs. We also have a really robust early detection, rapid response sampling program, and education is the thread that goes through all of it. We hire outreach and education technicians, and we also expect folks doing watercraft or sampling work to educate the public on this as well. Just a brief overview if you've got no idea what the heck I'm talking about when I mention things like zebra and quagga mussels. So these species are cousins, but they are invasive in all of the same ways. They are bivalve mollusks, meaning that they have two shells, and their color patterns can vary a lot. The photos that we use during these presentations make it seem really easy to tell the difference between the two, but in real life they can be quite variable. And the reasons that we worry about species like this are mainly because they attach to hard surfaces with what we call byssal threads. They actually excrete it as a liquid, and then it forms a physical and mechanical chemical bond with the surface that they attach to, meaning that they will stay attached to surfaces even after they die. This is a concern for our infrastructure when you think about these attaching inside of pipes and water conveyance systems. And we don't necessarily have enough water to be not thinking about these sort of things. Anything that can impact our ability to deliver and receive water is a really big concern, especially out here on the western slope of Colorado, where I am based. These species are also very rapid reproducers, and not only do they harm our infrastructure, but they can really change the ecosystem of places that they're introduced by filter feeding. They are removing phytoplankton and zooplankton from the water column, which can affect the light penetration, which can affect foraging habits of fishes. They're also out competing a lot of native benthic organisms like snails, native clams, and mollusks. So they have a lot of ecosystem impacts as well, but the average person that we speak to doesn't always care so much about the downfall of native bivalves as much as they do about their water bills going up or not being able to irrigate at all. Right. And a fun little addition, the golden mussel has now entered the equation. So, since our program started our work in 2008 to prevent the introduction of zebra and quagga mussels, all of our language has really revolved around those two particular species until I'm sorry, this is incorrect, October of 2024, not 2025. Golden mussels were discovered in North America for the very first time. They were introduced by what we believe was an international cargo carrying ship that came to the port of Stockton in California. And unfortunately, these species are very similar to zebra and quagga mussels in the way that they attach to surfaces, reproduce very rapidly, and filter feed very rapidly. But not only that, They do it much more efficiently than zebra and quagga mussels, so they can filter about 10 times the amount of water. Zebra and quagga mussels, by the individual mussel, can filter about 1 liter of water per day, which is pretty considerable when we're thinking about millions of mussels being in a system. Golden mussels filter water 10 times faster than that, so much more nutrient removal from the system and a much faster changing environment that they are creating. These are also quite interesting because their veligers, or their planktonic juvenile stage, are motile. So the way that these species reproduce, they are broadcast spawners. Because they are attached in one place, they can't all get together and meet up for reproduction. So what they do is they release their gametes into the water column. Those find each other and fertilize into a little planktonic organism called a veliger. That veliger will float freely with the water as it grows its shell and eventually will settle down out of the water column and attach to a surface. So these are very different from zebra and quagga mussels in the way that their veligers can swim. They can move places other than where the water is taking them, and they are capable of coordinated swimming. So this is a new, interesting factor that can affect their colonization habits. So far, these species are only known to be in California, but there is quite a lot of concern because they are in a very, very wide area of California that really where containment of the species is not feasible. It's an open water system, lots of boating, and minimal resources for containment by the state of California. So these are something that are on the horizon that we are certainly on the lookout for, though we have not seen any cases in Colorado yet. So, like I mentioned, I'm sorry, their life stages really impact how we are sampling for and how we're detecting these species, as well as our understanding of how they're colonizing a system. So they'll start as a veliger. They are microscopic. You are not going to be able to see this in the water, but they cause a really big concern with these veligers for us when it comes to standing water that could be present inside a watercraft, waders, even buckets that folks are using, and even non-motorized watercraft like rafts and kayaks. A very small amount of water can move these because they are microscopic. So we'll talk a little bit more about our calls to action and how we can prevent the spread ourselves as recreators and folks that are moving around in the world. So the next life stage is what we call the settler. This is as they are moving through the system, they are building up that shell out of calcium carbonate, and eventually they are getting too heavy to float anymore. So they are going to settle down onto a surface. At this point, they are visible to the human eye, but they just look like little specks of black. If you look very closely at them, you can see that characteristic shape of their shell, but ultimately it's pretty hard to tell what they are. There's all kinds of black and brown smudges and specks in our water systems that can look similar. And then ultimately, these species are sessile as adults. That means that they do not move. They are not crawling anywhere. They are not moving upstream. Any upstream movement of these species is going to be because of transportation on recreational watercraft or other sort of equipment, but ultimately human activities. So why are we even dealing with this? Where did they come from? Zebra and quagga mussels originated in in Russia and the Ukraine. They were introduced by cargo carrying ships that were accessing the Great Lakes um, through the St. Lawrence Seaway. So at the time, in the early 80s, there really wasn't a lot of regulations about ballast water exchange or biofouling. And by the time that we realized that these were present in Lake St. Clair in 1989, they were probably very well established in the lakes by that point. And we just didn't even notice because it wasn't on our radar until we started seeing their detrimental effects on our infrastructure. Golden mussels, on the other hand, are native to Asia. In China, they were introduced as an invasive species accidentally to Brazil in 1991. So we have been looking into a pretty big body of research that Brazil has generated about the detrimental effects of these mussels. Unfortunately, these were introduced to North America for the very first time in 2024. From that point, the way that zebra and quagga mussels were spread from the Great Lakes region was widely by recreational watercraft. So they will attach to a surface, live there for their entire 4 to 5 year lifespan, and they can live outside of the water for 30 days. So if a watercraft has attached mussels and is being moved to another body of water within the span of a month or so, they can be reinfesting new locations that way. For whatever it's worth, in lakes populated with zebra and quagga mussels do tend to outcompete zebra mussels. They seem to be just a little bit more robust, a little bit more tolerant to adverse conditions. But ultimately, these species can live right underneath frozen reservoirs. They can live in very warm temperatures. So lots of folks have historically believed that these may not be suitable to live in Colorado because of high elevation, low temperatures in the winter. But like any invasive species that's good at its job of being invasive, they are very tolerant to a really wide range of conditions. So, what does this have to do with us here in Colorado? Um, Very shortly after I became a full-time employee with this agency, we detected the first adult zebra mussel ever found in Colorado in Highline Lake, which, if you're unfamiliar with the western slope of Colorado, this is just west of Grand Junction, pretty close to the Utah border. Highline Lake is present on a state park, which we felt presented us with a unique opportunity to attempt an eradication. We are very much prevention focused. It is a lot more cost effective to prevent this species than it is to attempt eradication and to live alongside of them. But ultimately, with having them at a state park where we had control of the recreational opportunity, the fishery, the water rights, we felt like it was our duty to attempt an eradication. Ultimately, we used a chemical, which is an EPA registered molluscicide called EarthTech QZ. Copper sulfate pentahydrate is the main ingredient, and the mode of action is that zebra mussels, as they're filter feeding and bringing water into their body, that copper is toxic to them and ultimately kills them. The hope of doing this was to preserve the fishery and eradicate the mussels at the same time. Highline Lake is an artificially created reservoir that was created purely for recreation on the western slope, so it is not relied upon for irrigation use or any other industrial use. So the hope was to keep that warm water fishery that they had built there and eradicate the mussels. Our first application of the molluscicide was in March of 2023. We continued monitoring throughout the season, but ultimately at the end of the boating season, when we removed boat docks, buoys, and other seasonal infrastructure, we did find more adult zebra mussels on that equipment. The decision was ultimately made to drain the reservoir entirely at the cost of that fishery. Ultimately, the thought behind that was that we can restock the fish, we can regrow the fishery, but if we have an infestation that takes hold, that is something that cannot be undone. So, as much as it was sad for our aquatic biologists to see that fishery go, they were willing to sacrifice that for the greater good. Um, and after all of that, our sampling and monitoring picked up a whole lot in this area to really understand the extent of the infestation, both upstream and downstream of the reservoir. Before we took any action with applying this chemical or draining, there was very exhaustive sampling that was performed both upstream and downstream of the reservoir, and at that time, we couldn't find any evidence of any life stage of mussel, not even their DNA present in the system. So at the time, we believed that this was an issue isolated to Highline, but unfortunately, after the fact, we learned that villagers were being reintroduced to Highline Lake through the Colorado River ultimately. We detected villagers within the government Highline Canal, which diverts from the Colorado River and feeds Highline Lake. Pretty much any irrigation, any pond, any canal, any body of water in the Grand Junction Valley is fed from the Colorado River. So we realized that what we had found at Highline was really more of the termination point and not the beginning of this issue. So we started pulling that string upstream further and further and continued sampling as far upstream as Glenwood Springs in 2024. By the end of the 2024 operating season, the furthest point upstream that we had detected zebra mussel villagers was in the Debec area. So the red are where we had found villagers, and the green was where we had sampled but not found villagers. We were doing very, very exhaustive surveys, getting on the river on rafts, doing shoreline surveys, looking for environmental DNA as well as villagers and adults, with the help of the U.S. Geological Survey, the Bureau of Reclamation, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Bureau of Land Management. This became a very interagency effort when it transcended our state park at Highline Lake. So this is a really big, really complicated effort in a very vast hydrological system. So at the end of 2024, we had found no additional adult mussels outside of Highline Lake, villagers only. So the search was continuing for a potential upstream source of these villagers. And then the joys of 2025. For whatever it's worth, as terrible as it is to find more mussels, it really helps us understand the bigger picture better. So on July 3rd, actually, I personally went to sample a privately owned body of water. This was following some detections of both eDNA and villagers in the Newcastle area along I-70. We started reaching out to private landowners in the vicinity to ask their permission to sample and see if we could learn anything more about the extent of the infestation by sampling privately owned bodies of water. So this landowner gave us permission to sample and has worked with us all the way, but ultimately there was a pretty robust population of adult zebra mussels in this body of water in Eagle County. To this day, this is the furthest upstream that we have detected mussels so far, but that's not to say that ongoing sampling couldn't unearth another location even further upstream. We had a very high concentration of villagers in this sample. This microscopic photo here, everything that has a little cross on it is a villager. So we use cross-polarizing microscopy, and zebra and quagga mussel villagers will appear under the microscope as having that cross. So that is how we are able to identify those, in addition to the more obviously visible adults. There were two culverts in this body of water that may have been connecting it to the Colorado River, and with the help of the landowner, those culverts were removed, and this body of water was completely isolated from the Colorado River. So there is no river water going into or out of this body of water. And just in case I don't mention it later, we did treat this body of water with the same molluscicide that we used previously at Highline Lake, EarthTech QZ. The hope was that if we were able to isolate it, we could eradicate mussels from this privately owned body of water since it's isolated from any source infestation. But the fun didn't end there. Of course, it didn't, because the Colorado River system is very vast. So if these things are being introduced, it's pretty unlikely that they're only going to be affecting one location. East and West Lake is part of a state wildlife area in town here in Grand Junction. The water is actually owned and managed by the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. So, unfortunately, we did discover adult zebra mussels in this location as well, quite a bit downstream from that finding in Eagle County, but ultimately is filled by water that comes from the Colorado River by way of some open canals throughout Grand Junction. As typical, it starts with the finding of some DNA or velagers, and then when we go to take a closer look, we find adult mussels. Fortunately, with the help of the BOR, we were able to isolate this lake from the Colorado system as well. And the BOR is putting together some plans to test some alternative molluscicides in this area so that we can get a real sense of what is the most worthwhile for our investment and what gives us the best chance of, at this point, minimizing these mussels' impact to infrastructure. Um, with Highline Lake eradication, we thought that it was an option at the time. We thought that this was only affecting one body of water, but now that we know these to be infesting the Colorado River system, eradication really is not something that we are hoping for at this point. We really just want to minimize the impact to irrigation systems and hydroelectric systems and other important infrastructure for water conveyance in the Colorado River. With this nice, lovely outlet here that you see in the top left corner, this was how water was leaving East and West Lake and going into the Colorado River. This one pictured here is a side channel that convenes with the Colorado River a few hundred yards down. Unfortunately, we did find adult zebra mussels in that side channel as well as in the main stem of the Colorado River. So this was the first time that we've detected adult mussels in the main stem of the Colorado River itself. Here's a quick wrap up of our results of our sampling efforts in 2025. So you'll see purple is where we have found zebra mussels. Orange is where we found New Zealand mud snails, which is another species that our program samples for and manages, but ultimately tends to take a backseat to the mussels because it doesn't stand to harm infrastructure quite as severely as zebra or quagga mussels do. In the very last sort of weeks of our operating season for 2025, we did something that we called the River Blitz. We had folks from 10 different agencies and around 80 different individual folks sampling all the way from the Granby Dam to the state line with Utah for any adult mussel. Several are on privately owned bodies of water in the Grand Junction area. And again, the furthest upstream point that we have found adult mussels or mussels of any life stage at this point is in Eagle County on that privately owned body of water. So we will continue to sample more than we ever have on the western slope to continue to understand this infestation. We have identified over 1,000 privately owned water bodies just within the Grand Valley. We're not even thinking about DeBeck, Rifle, and Glenwood. So there are lots and lots of ponds that all get water from the Colorado River that we really hope to get permission from landowners to take a look at. Of course, this slide here is only a snapshot of local potential impacts, but there are lots of irrigation districts in this area that are very concerned about this issue. The Orchard Mesa Irrigation District has a hydroelectric power facility in the Palisade area where they are pulling raw water directly from the Colorado River and using that to generate power. The Palisade Irrigation District, Mesa County Irrigation District, Grand Valley Water Users Association, Grand Valley Irrigation Company, you name it, all of these folks rely heavily on delivering water to their water users. Ooh, excuse me, that is truly their job. So there's a lot of concerns with mussels proliferating inside the piped systems. We have a lot of open canals that can be drained, and that oftentimes any residual water in those canals will freeze over the winter. As long as it freezes all the way to the bottom, that would eliminate any mussels there, but the concerns would be more for the underground laterals that are coming from those canals to deliver water to irrigators. We think about things like Palisade peaches and Palisade wine, and those micro irrigation pipes are about the diameter of a pinky. So even just a few mussels can truly disable the agricultural system of Palisade or Loma or anywhere in the Grand Valley that relies heavily on the production of those crops, feeding livestock, and, flushing our toilets. I like when my toilet flushes. I like when I turn my sink on and water comes out. So this is not just a recreational issue. This is if you need water to survive, this is an issue that should be on your radar. The Grand Valley Water Users Association has been amazing to work with throughout this process, and they have actually been using, again, that same EarthTech QZ, EPA registered molluscicide, and applying it within their canal system. This has been a preventative for them. Villagers have been detected in their system, but so far, no adults. The fear factor is how would we know if there are adults present in their underground piped systems until we start seeing failure to deliver water or some sort of impediment to the water delivery? At which point it would be very, very expensive to dig those pipes out of the ground and replace them, or get very specialized equipment that can scrape mussels from the insides of underground pipes. And even after mussels die, they still stay attached to surfaces. So when it comes to treating, prevention is a great stance. And we're really grateful that the Grand Valley Water Users Association is putting in the effort. So what they've been doing is coming right up to the end of their irrigation season. They will treat their canals with EarthTech QZ. They will ask their water users to open their head gates and allow the water to flow through all the way to the end of the system so that any water that is remaining underground at low points in places that don't freeze over the winter, at least the water remaining in there is treated with the chemical so that can deter the attachment and proliferation of mussels during that time. The thing that is unfortunate about this is it costs money. Um, these folks are doing their best to pursue grants, but unfortunately, grant work doesn't always happen at the speed that we need it to for these rapid response efforts. So ultimately, their water users are footing the bill to this to some extent, but ultimately, it would cost quite a lot more if they had to replace extensive underground infrastructure. So it is a big educational hurdle that we're crossing to let people know that yes, this is increasing your bill a little bit, but your bill would be increased even more if we had to do major infrastructure replacements throughout this very, very expansive system. So, if anyone here ever goes outside or goes near the water or uses the Colorado River, recreates in any way, I wanted to give you guys a little bit of information about what you can be looking for. So mussels do have two shells, and they're going to be attached to hard surfaces. Um, you can pull them off. They feel a little bit like a wiggly tooth. So there will be a little bit of resistance, and you can wiggle them around, but you can pull them off. Because their coloration is so variable, I tried to highlight that with some of these photos of mussels that we had found at Highline Lake, where some have very obvious visible stripes, and some look like they don't have stripes at all. And some of them are covered in a layer of silt and you can't see. So looking for something that is sort of D-shaped with one flat edge is another good way to sort of tell these apart from other organisms you might be seeing. And then I did just want to share a species that's commonly mistaken for zebra and quagga mussels, which is the corbicula clam. We see issues with these all the time. They are not native to Colorado, but ultimately they were introduced to Colorado and became widespread by 1993, and our aquatic nuisance species program did not start our work until 2008. So unfortunately, though these species are invasive, they did beat us to the punch, and we don't worry about them as much as we worry about zebra and quagga mussels because they cannot attach to surfaces. We do see people that get a large accumulation of these inside of their head gates, on the termination point of their irrigation, so they aren't without their problems. However, they are not zebra and quagga mussels. Big differences. These clams have much more of a round shape, whereas zebra and quagga mussels are more oblong. Zebra mussels, particularly, are more the shape of the capital letter D. And then these corbicula clams also have three-dimensional ridges on their shells, whereas we describe zebra and quagga mussels as smooth criminals. Their shells are very smooth to the touch, whereas these clams will have ridges that you can feel pretty easily. So just know, when folks make reports to our program, we will always follow up. We will go out and take a look for ourselves, but oftentimes reports that we get are actually folks that are seeing these corbicula clams. Though I don't want to deter anybody from reporting, we always appreciate reports and we will always follow up with them. But just so you're aware, there is a look-alike out there. So, what is my call to action to people of the world who need water to live? If you're a recreator, clean, drain, and dry are the magic words for us. This means removing any mud, any plant material, and any standing water from your equipment before you move to a new location. I know my kayak gets very full of water when I float the river, so I make a concerted effort to drain it out when I pull out of the river, keep that river water in the river, clean off mud using just a little microfiber towel, a little veggie brush, something can help get mud off as well, and just making sure that you're not moving any plant material. Again, though we talk a lot about mussels, invasive plants, invasive snails, and even fish pathogens are things that we would prefer not to be moved between locations by recreational watercraft or even folks doing their job, taking water sampling, all that sort of stuff. There's lots of folks whose work involves going around to different bodies of water. So just keeping that clean, drain, dry in mind. No plants, no water, no mud, and no mussels should be moving around. And if you ever see something that you're worried about, this email right here, invasive.species@state.co.us, is a great way to reach out to our program and share your report. Taking photos helps us a lot. So if you see something that you're worried about, if you have the ability to snap a photo, you can email that to us, you can share a location, and we can send some members of our sampling crew out to take a look. We have detections of invasive species all the time that are reported to us by the public, whether it's directly or something that was uploaded to a site like iNaturalist. So there's a lot more of the general public than there are of invasive species program employees. So you folks out there on the ground can really help, teach us a lot about what's happening out there in the world. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions. This link here will take you to our aquatic nuisance species page with very specific instructions about how to clean your gear, depending on what sort of recreation you might be doing. There's also my contact information here. This is my work cell phone. I'm happy to take direct reports of any sightings as well. My email address, and then this bottom email and phone number are for our program office, where you can always call to ask questions or make reports. So go ahead and ask any questions if they come to mind.
I don't have any questions, but this is so fascinating.
Yeah, thank you. This is all I think about, so I think it's pretty interesting. I'm glad that you guys feel the same.
I think I'm going to think about it too nonstop after this.
It is hard to turn off, once your eyes are open to it, I find.
Well, and I just went to California last week and I was on the beach and it was just like the natural mussels, but just how many there are, right? Like it's insane. And so
Yes.
just to think about them impacting our waterways and stuff is pretty crazy.
We got enough water to go around, right? That's what I
That's
always hear.
what I hear.
So,
Maddie, question for you. How do you stay optimistic when you're working with invasive species every day? It feels like a really challenging job to do.
Yes, thank you for thinking of that. We do feel like the bad news bears a lot of days, but ultimately, the way I think of this is we have now 79 preventative watercraft inspection locations, and only one of those at Highline Lake has mussels. So to me, that says that the preventative efforts that we're doing are working. We had something slip through the cracks, and unfortunately, it slipped into the Colorado River, which is a very vast system. But ultimately, that introduction is now being moved through that system because that's where the water goes, not necessarily because lots of people are doing the wrong things or moving them around. So most people understand the importance of this. Most people ally with us and are on our side and want to know what they can do better. So ultimately, the prevention is working where it needs to work, and people really do want to rally behind us and do the right thing. So it's really the community and the people that keep us going and keep us feeling optimistic.
I have
Thanks,
a,
Maddie. Oh, I'm
oh,
sorry.
sorry. No, you go, Harmony.
Thank you.
Wait.
I was just going to jump in here. I had two questions for you, Maddie. It was great presentation. Um, so you touched upon the corbicula clams as being often mistaken for the invasive mussels. Are there any native mussels that are often mistaken, or is it the corbicula clams? That's my first question. And then my second question, are there any Colorado species that eat these zebra mussels or quagga mussels, or is are there birds or fish or anything that eats them? Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Yeah, thank you. Both great questions. So, there are quite a lot of native bivalves to Colorado, both clams and mussels. Unfortunately, a lot of those are being outcompeted by the corbiculas. So, what people see most often are those corbicula clams, where they're
Okay.
a big old pile of their shells. So, there are natives, but we do find that the corbicula proliferates so much that that's something that people notice. Um, and then, I'm so sorry. Can you remind me of your second question,
Yeah, it
please?
was, is there anything that eats them?
Yes. So fish will certainly eat these mussels. I believe potentially even little shoreline foragers like raccoons will pick them up. I know we've seen little piles of corbicula clams in places where they wouldn't naturally be further away from bodies of water, which tells me that little foragers are picking up those shells and eating them. But unfortunately, animals are a lot smarter than humans in this way, where they're not going to eradicate a good food source for themselves. So, though they will snack on it from time to time, even native predators are not going to eat so many of them that they are completely eradicated or really even reduced in any measurable way, unfortunately.
So for in conclusion, basically, if someone were to see a D-shaped bivalve, the best bet would be to just call you to confirm that it is in fact native or an invasive, basically.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Thank
100%.
you.
We very strongly encourage people to ask, instead of just say, oh, it's probably not a big deal. And maybe it is, but it's always worth asking.
Thank you.
Thank you.
When you talked about finding it in the private lake, and I think you were talking about like cost being up to 325,000, who had to pay for that?
So the 325,000 was for the Highline Lakes eradication efforts. CPW attempted to get a federal rapid response grant. There are lots of federal grant opportunities for responses to these invasive species, but unfortunately, federal money doesn't just move quickly. So even though it's for rapid response, it wasn't as rapid as we needed it to be. So Colorado Parks and Wildlife actually absorbed that cost. Our program does have a 35-65 cost share with the Army Corps of Engineers. So we are able to access that money a little more readily as it's part of our regular operating budget. So we do get help from a lot of federal partners for our general funding, but yeah, Colorado Parks and Wildlife absorbed that.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
Does anybody else have any questions for Maddie?
Let me get off easy.
I guess. Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, I really appreciate the interest, and you folks are always welcome to reach out to me directly if you have any other questions or if you want to report a sighting.
Yeah, and if you want to share that slide with your contact information, I can share that with the recording to all of our conservation districts.
Yep, I'll be happy to.
Thank you.